Yeah.
Ready, Kim?
I started.
All right, Daniel, chapter 2, beginning of verse 31. So we actually start diving into some of the prophecy here in Daniel. We have we set up last week the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, and Daniel's was able to also get that dream from the Lord, and now he's about to tell the dream to Nebuchadnezzar and the interpretation. I just want to say before we dive into it is that the interpretation of the dream, Daniel gives a little bit of interpretation, but then there's a lot of interpretation that goes on by commentaries on what the different kingdoms are, what do they really mean, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll go into that as we dive in this morning. But I just want you to recognize that the main message is not about which specific kingdom he's talking about and which specific people, and whether we know that accurately is not the important message of what he's trying to get across here. And I'll try to point out what the real message is as we get to it, but don't get wrapped up in, I'm not sure exactly which kingdom it is and which one comes first and which one comes second. That is not the major message that he's trying to get across. He's really trying to say that, as we've said from the beginning, that God's in charge, that there's going to be a lot of kingdoms come and go, but in the end, God's in charge. And so let's make sure we don't miss that message as we go through the details of all of this. All right, so we have got one more major scene in human history ahead of us, and that's the coming of Christ, right? That is the next major scene that happens. And so we're going to be looking at, I just want you to turn for a minute to Luke chapter 21 before we get into Daniel. Luke chapter 21, verse 24. In Luke 21, Jesus is talking here, and this is Jesus talking, right? He's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. And in verse 24, it says, "And they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled." So this statement, the times of the Gentiles, is an important phrase. It is the time that we are in right now. We are in the times of the Gentiles. And the times of the Gentiles actually started when Judah was taken away into captivity to Babylon. That's the beginning of the times of the Gentiles. The times of the Gentiles will end when Christ comes again. So when we talk about the times of the Gentiles, and it really is when the Gentiles are in control of this world, right? The Gentiles are in control of this world. They're responsible for this world. We'll see that as we get into the particular verses, but they are the ones that are in control of the world system right now, and particularly with regard to Jerusalem, right? That Jerusalem is not in God's control anymore, in the worldly sense. It really is under the control of humans. It's under the control of Gentiles. There's a giant mosque right in the center of Jerusalem, right? It's not controlled by the Israelites even though it's their holy city. So that's something important to recognize, that we are in the time of the Gentiles right now. One other thing I want you to see, if you go back to Daniel and turn left to Ezekiel chapter 21. Ezekiel 21, verse 15. So remember, Ezekiel is written at the same time of Daniel. They were contemporaries. Ezekiel 21. That is not right.
You said Ezekiel 21, verse 15, that talks about the point of the sword?
Yeah, that's not right. Well, I can't find it. Anyway, somewhere in Ezekiel, it talks about that Let me see. It's got to be right near here somewhere.
But 21:18, or 18 and 29 talks of the sword of Nebuchadnezzar. Is that
No.
where you're going?
Well, just forget it. All right, listen. The point that the message that's in there is that the glory has departed from Jerusalem, right? That there comes a time when Babylon sweeps in, and then actually God leaves Jerusalem. God, the cherubim leave Jerusalem. God leaves Jerusalem. He's moved away from Jerusalem. So again, this is the times of the Gentiles. When the Gentiles move in, God actually leaves the temple. His spirit is not resting on the temple anymore. He leaves with the cherubim and is no longer in Jerusalem. So it is a real break in kind of the history right here when Judah is taken away to Babylon. So what we see then is it's the first time really that Jerusalem has been taken over, right? When the Assyrians came in, they took away the northern kingdom, but they never actually took away Jerusalem. That comes only from the Babylonians. So again, from the Babylonians until the Messiah comes. Now, one other thing I want to just deal with here is why does God give this prophecy to Daniel now? Right? Why does God give this prophecy about the whole rest of the times of the Gentiles? So this prophecy that's given to Nebuchadnezzar is a prophecy about the whole rest of this times of the Gentiles. He's going to give us this overview of the whole times of the Gentiles. Why does God give that to Nebuchadnezzar now? Why does he give it to Daniel now? That's a question. Your mics are open.
Would it be so that the future people can see that his prophecy was fulfilled?
Yeah. But why for the Israelite people now do they need this message?
Well, because they're in captivity, they turned away from God, and this is prophecy of God redeeming his kingdom at the end times.
Yeah, I think that's it. Let me say it this way: that they're taken away from that captivity to captivity. As we read back in Psalms a couple of weeks ago, right? They are moaning and bewailing that they are taken away into captivity. They've lost Jerusalem. They're all by themselves. And I think God here brings this whole prophecy to them to say, hey, listen, the game is not over. There's still a lot more innings in the game. And by the way, in the end, I win. Right? So I think it was a real encouragement for them that they were still in God's hand, even though they were in Babylon and things were looking bleak at this time. God was still in control, and he was still going to do something with the Israelites in human history. Now for the, we're going to actually be talking about the thousands of years here, but still for them, the point was that God's still in charge, that Israel, he has said Israel was a favored nation. They're still a favored nation. He's still their people. They are still his people, and that will play out. So again, I think he just wanted to encourage them. At this point, the temple has been destroyed and pillaged, and all the metals have been removed, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it was just supposed to be a real encouragement to them. Daniel's saying, no, it's not over. There's still more to come. All right, the other thing, just remember that last week, I'm back in Daniel now, last week when we looked at verse 28, he talked about the latter days, that this revelation given to Nebuchadnezzar was about the latter days, which is a phrase used in Scripture over and over to return to talk about when the Messiah comes, right? So Jews throughout history and Christians throughout history understand these latter days to be about when the Messiah comes. So that's as Jews would read through Daniel, they would understand that they're talking about when the Messiah comes, and that becomes important as we get later into the actual vision that he has here. So, all right, so let's get into, so that's kind of just introduction. Let's get into the verses then, beginning at verse 31. It says, "You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome." So again, Daniel is relating the dream to the king. The king either doesn't remember or is challenging is challenging them to actually tell him what the dream is. So he's telling them, this is what you saw. You saw this immense statue, this immense, glorious, impressive statue. By the way, the statue, behold a great image, and the image looked like a man, right? It was a great image of a man. The whole thing, and this is an important point, the whole thing represented man's work, right? This whole image, as we look at the different metals that it's made out of, etc., it's all made of man's work, and it's an awesome. But the king is overwhelmed by it. It's awesome. It's incredible. It's a great image. Its splendor was excellent, and it stood before you, and its form was awesome. In other words, it was scary. It was awe-striking. It was something that would brought fear as the king looked at it in his vision, in his dream, right? He saw this image, as we talked about, right? He couldn't sleep, any of those things. It brought great fear to him as he saw this image. Let's keep going. The image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. So you see this, again, this amazing image, right? Gold, silver, bronze, iron, a very strong image. It does have this odd mixture in the feet of clay and iron, which, if you look at this huge, immense image, it seems like it's a little bit unstable, right? It's on these clay feet. They're a mixture of iron and clay feet that he has here, which makes it a little bit unstable, this huge, immense, amazing statue. So then verse 34. "You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them into pieces." So now we have this stone that's cut without hands. In other words, there was no stone cutter. There was no human that made this stone. This was a stone that is in some sense supernatural, right? That comes out of nowhere. It just comes flying into the scene here. You watch as a stone was cut out without human hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them into pieces. So I think that part of what the image is trying to say here is this is some small stone that comes in and hits this huge, giant image at its feet and shatters it and breaks it down. So there's definitely a contrast they're trying to make here between the size of the stone and the size of the image. It's an immense, gigantic, huge image, and this small stone comes flying in out of nowhere and breaks it into pieces. And then verse 35, even more, it says, "Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floor. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found, and the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth." So this image of it being crushed into chaff, if you just turn a minute to Matthew chapter 3. Matthew 3, verse 12. Hopefully I've got the right one this time. This is John the Baptist speaking in John 3:12. It talks about God here, and it says, "His winnowing fan is in his hand, and he will thoroughly clean out his threshing floor and gather his wheat into the barn, and he will burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire." And those of you who remember your Israelite history know this is the way when they had grain to in order to clean the grain, it was filled with the grain and the chaff. And so they would take a threshing fan or a pitchfork, if you will, reach into this big pile, throw it up in the air, and then the chaff, which was lightweight, would be blown away by the wind, and the seeds and the grain would fall to the bottom. And they would do this over and over to get rid of all the chaff. So this is actually the picture that he's using back in Daniel now, when he's talking about all of a sudden these things were crushed and they became like chaff in the summer threshing floor, and the wind carried them away so that no trace of them. I mean, it's the thing I want you to see here is that whatever happened to this giant, immense statue made it into something that was a material light enough such that it could be blown away by the wind. So it was crushed into powder, right? This little stone that comes in from the side not only breaks it into like big chunks, but it crushes it into a powder. We're going to talk more about that later when we talk about the stone, but this little stone crushed this huge, immense statue into a powder, and then the wind carried them away such that no trace was found of them, right? So again, these kingdom, as we'll talk about in a minute, there's no trace of them, no influence, no power. All of it is gone as the stone comes in. And then at the end of this verse, right, the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So now you have this stone, this small stone. It crushes the immense statue. The statue blows away, and then the stone gets larger and larger and larger, and essentially takes over the whole mountain. Again, we'll get into the interpretation in a minute, but just want you to make sure you see the picture as we get into it here. All right, so that is the dream. That's the thing that got him all scared to death. And so then we get to verse 36. It says, "This is the dream. Now we will tell the interpretation of it before the king." Now, I just got to pause here and say it's interesting here that Nebuchadnezzar hasn't said anything. Right? He hasn't said, "Now, wait a minute, that's not exactly what the dream was. I think it was a little bit different from that. That's not what I remember." I think he's standing there with his mouth agape, right? It's just that Daniel could know this dream, could know it to all the details, and then bring it back to him. So I think he's already beginning to see, wow, this is something very unusual that Daniel can relate this dream to me. And then notice that he says, "Now we will tell the interpretation of it before the king." So he brings in his fellows, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. He brings those guys in to the interpretation that says, "We're going to tell you the interpretation of the dream." And then later on, you see that he takes care of them after the dream also. But here he's bringing them in and saying, we got this from the Lord, and we're going to give you the interpretation. All right, now verse 37. "You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom of power, strength, and glory." So first thing, you are king of kings. You, O king, are king of kings, right? Now this is certainly just a reflection of who Nebuchadnezzar was. He certainly was a king of many different provinces around Babylon, not just Babylon itself, but the whole Babylonian Empire. So he is a king of many kings across the empire. I think there were 7 provinces, if I remember, and so each one of those had their own little vassal king, and so he's the king over all of those. So he's just stating the reality of who Nebuchadnezzar is. You are the king of kings. But the next statement is probably the most important one. "For the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory," right? The God of heaven has given this to you. He makes this point out several times as we go through the passage. This is the first time. You remember, it's the same thing if you go back to verse 28, right? He says, "There is a God in heaven who revealed this," right? So again, he's saying it's God who revealed this, and now he's saying it's God who actually put you in power. It's God that gave you your kingdom. This is not something Nebuchadnezzar would have thought of by himself, right? I mean, this is something that's going to be challenging for Nebuchadnezzar, and we'll see in later chapters how he still gets confused over this over and over again. But right now, Daniel's trying to say very clearly to him that it's the God in heaven who's given you the kingdom, given you the power, given you the strength, and given you all this glory. And then in verse 38, "And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, the birds of heaven, he has given them into your hand. and he has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold, right? So first of all, again, he's saying, yes, you have this great kingdom. You are master over all of it, but he has given them into your hand. He has made you ruler over them all. I mean, he, up front in this interpretation, he's trying to get across to Nebuchadnezzar, it's because the Lord of heaven has decided that you are in this position. He has made you the ruler. He has given you all these things. He has made this happen. Now, he says you are the head of gold. So this is the first. Now he's to the interpretation of the dream. Right, the head of this giant statue was made of gold. He's saying you, Nebuchadnezzar, are that head. You are the head of gold. Now, just in general, what we're talking about with this statue, in general, the interpretation that he says is that they are different kingdoms that are going to come to pass over time. The first kingdom is your kingdom, Nebuchadnezzar. It's the Babylonian kingdom. Now, this is the only time that he actually names a king, right? He says it's you, Nebuchadnezzar, that are the head of gold. He doesn't say your kingdom, and that's because Nebuchadnezzar was the kingdom, right? It was the Babylonian kingdom. The other thing just to recognize is that Babylon historically was well known for its gold. It had accumulated massive amounts of gold. It had all of its buildings that were covered in gold. So it was called the Golden City. So for him to be identified with gold would make sense to everybody who would see this interpretation. So the first thing he says, you're the head, you're the first one, you got the most beautiful metal, if you will, and that's you, Nebuchadnezzar. Now, verse 39. And after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours, and then a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over the earth. So here in this one little sentence, he covers the next two kingdoms with very simple words. Folks have said that, he says, but after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours, right? He didn't want to get Nebuchadnezzar upset, or he didn't really want to identify so much who that next kingdom was, so that Nebuchadnezzar would react against it. And so he just gets to this general statement, it's just another kingdom inferior to yours, and then a third kingdom, etc. There is some discrepancy over the word inferior as to whether it means, that it was less than yours, it wasn't as powerful as yours, it wasn't as wonderful as yours. And I got to tell you, there are whole books I found written on this silly word inferior. It could simply mean next down the statue, right? You got the top, and then the next inferior one, or the next one down, is the silver, and the next one down is bronze. It could mean that they were more decadent as they got down. What's interesting is that the kingdoms that came after Babylon were actually larger than Babylon. They had greater power, greater influence than Babylon did. So we talk about the next kingdom, which is the silver, we're really talking about the Medo-Persian Empire. And the Medo-Persian was a combination of the Medes and the Persians, right? Their first king was Cyrus. Cyrus actually had a Persian father and a Median or Mede mother. Not sure if Median makes sense, but anyway, his mother and father were from the two kingdoms. He brought them together, and that was the Medo-Persian Empire. So it's the image here of the two arms and the chest. Kind of said that there were two parts to this, right? It was the Medes and the Persians. But again, the Medo-Persian Empire was actually larger and stronger than the Babylonian Empire. But what's interesting here is that in the interpretation, he really doesn't say anything about that empire to Nebuchadnezzar. I think, again, he didn't want to worry Nebuchadnezzar about what was about to happen, or at least what was going to happen 60 or 70 years from now. The other thing, just to think, the Medo-Persian Empire was a large trade empire. So a lot of what they did was trade, and the currency of that trade was silver. They had great quantities and vats of silver because of that trade. So Again, identifying the Medes and Persians with silver would be a natural thing for the reader who would understand that, because they would be associated with silver because of the taxes that they had throughout their system, etc. So again, you got the Babylonian Empire, the Gold Empire, you got the Medo-Persian Empire, the Silver Empire. Then we come down to the next empire that he says, I've lost it. Yeah, so then a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And again, if you go back above, he talks about this is the belly and the thighs of this great beast were of bronze, or the belly and the sides were made of bronze. So this is the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great. There were two major provinces of the Greek Empire. There was the Syrian part and the Egyptian part, but again, all ruled by Alexander the Great. Again, his empire was larger than the Medo-Persians, and really, when it talks about shall rule over the whole earth, it was certainly ruled over the whole known earth at that time. Alexander's empire reached across all of the known earth at that time. He was called, Alexander of all the earth. I mean, that was his title, because he believed that he actually ruled over all that was the earth at that time, all the way from Europe to India. The other thing to note is that the Greek armor was actually made out of brass, out of a bronze and brass. So again, having the Greek Empire associated with brass, with bronze, would be a natural thing for people to understand, because they were called the brazen soldiers, because they were covered from head to toe with bronze as a part of who they were. All right, so we got the Gold Empire with the Babylonians. We've got the Silver Empire with the Medo-Persians, the Bronze Empire with the Greeks and Alexander the Great. So let's go on to verse 40. So again, verse 39, we got very succinct descriptions of the two major empires right after Babylon. We get to verse 40. Really through 43, we've got a very long description of this fourth empire. So let me just read that. It says, the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything, and like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. So let's just pause right there before I read the rest of it. So the first thing, we've got this fourth kingdom that is as strong as iron. So one thing to think about with this image, right? You got gold, silver, bronze, iron. You kind of got the softest metal at the top, down to the hardest metal at the bottom. You also have the most malleable metal at the top to the most brittle metal at the bottom. It's an interesting it's an interesting sequence, if you will, of the different metals that are on there. But you have this very strong metal at the bottom, iron, right? And it says iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. So when the Romans come in, the crush of the iron boot of Rome was all about defeating all of their enemies and bringing them underneath their power. So there's no question that the strong iron power of Rome came in. So the other thing to think about is these kingdoms that came after Babylon. You remember, as we talked about before, Babylon only lasted between 70 and 90 years. The Medo-Persians around 200 years. The Greeks around 200 years. The Romans actually lasted about 500 years. Right? So they actually became longer and longer realms of these kingdoms as they went forward. So that's a so again, this word inferior, that's why some people say it just means the next one down, not that they were weaker in the sense of their power, for sure. So this is the kingdom. They're crushing everything behind them. Now let's go to verse 41. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. Notice they talk about two different kinds of clay there. The potter's clay, some of your translations may say miry clay. It's the soft clay, right? It's the stuff that is before it goes in the oven. It's that kind of clay. But then the ceramic clay is the hard clay, after it comes out of the oven. Anyway, you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay, partly of iron. The kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with clay. And let me go on to 42. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. And as you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. So here, really, you're talking about the kingdom, whatever this kingdom is, right, that at some point in time, it starts out very strong as iron. It crushes everything in its path. But then eventually you got clay kind of creeping in. You got weakness creeping into this kingdom, and there's some division. There's some not connecting together between the different pieces of it. So in most commentaries, this fourth kingdom is Rome, the Roman Empire. I don't know if I've said that yet or not, but it's the Roman Empire. It came in very strong. And then in the end of the Roman Empire, you start to see the other countries that they have conquered start to exercise some power. The Roman Empire, first of all, you remember we've got two legs here in the image, right? The two strong legs. There were two different parts of the Roman Empire, the eastern and western provinces of Rome, so that fits the description. But then later on, as the Rome began to weaken, it actually divided up into 10 provinces, and so you see the 10 toes here, the 10 provinces of Rome. Some of them strong, some of them weak, some of them would not come together. One thing, if you notice in verse 43, it says, as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another. There was a lot of intermarriage between the Romans and the people in the land. And what you have here is that that didn't work out so well for them. They hoped that by marrying into the people that would strengthen the Roman kingdom. But in fact, what it did was actually weaken the Roman kingdom, and because it says, iron does not mix with clay. The two did not. It did not make the clay into iron. They still were separate, and they were still very weak. Now, the other thing to mention is that during Nebuchadnezzar's rule, when he was king, right, he was the ultimate authority in Babylon. There was no question about him being the king, about him being in charge. When you get down to the Medo-Persians, then you kind of got the Medes and the Persians. Then there was kind of this tension between who was in charge. Alexander, although a great leader, also had a series of provinces across his kingdom. And again, if you read through history, there were some of those who rose up against him during his reign. And then when you get to the Roman Empire, you got, again, these 10 provinces, kind of some weak, some strong. So you see kind of a reduction in authority as you go down. So if there's anything that word inferior mean, it could mean an inferior in their authority, because certainly as we get down to the Roman kingdom, you get the authority kind of breaking down as they do this intermarrying and they bring in these other cultures. It is. Let me just step aside from the lesson a minute and just say it's an interesting. There was an interesting set of commentaries around. It's very hard to rule a kingdom that has a lot of diversity in it, right? When it's all Babylonians and I can just say you're going to do this, it's very easy to do. When I've got Rome and I got all kinds of different people in there, and when I send a message out, some people understand it, some people don't understand it. It just made me think about our own situation in America right now, where we have this very diverse culture, and we're trying to send out a message, wherever that's coming from, right? and people are all interpreting it in different ways. It's just a very tough thing in order to manage a very diverse community. It's a very tough thing to have a democracy, actually, where people have their own interpretations of stuff. So there's probably a lesson there that I haven't fully formed yet, but there's something there about the relationship of what Rome went through and, frankly, what we're going through at this point in time that we probably need to learn from. All right, let's go on to verse 44. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Now, before we get to the good part of that verse, let me, up front, it says, and in the days of these kings. What kings is he talking about there?
The ones represented in the statute.
Yeah. In particular, he's talking about the 10 kings representing the 10 toes. Okay, so in the days of those kings, right, the 10 pieces of Rome, in that day, these things will happen. Now, I want to show you a couple things here. These 10 kings, these 10 toes, come up over and over in prophecy. I actually want to take you all the way to Revelations a minute. Oh, gee. Yeah, Revelation 17. Let's start around verse 9. Verse 17:9, Revelations. It says, here's the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, they must continue for a short time. The beast that was and is not in himself, also the 8th and is of the 7th, and will go into perdition. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. So let me just hold my comment until turn back to Daniel chapter 7. So one thing we're going to see as we go through Daniel, and if you did the little preview of Daniel in the whole book, you'll see that Daniel kind of repeats himself on some of these issues. And Daniel 7 really talks again about the sway of history over time. And if you look at Daniel 7, verse 7, it says, after this I saw the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had a huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So here, rather than talking about the different parts of one huge statue, it actually talks about 4 beasts that will come. And here it's talking about the 4th beast, which has huge iron teeth, again, iron. But then at the end, it talks about it was different from the other beasts because it had 10 horns. So instead of 10 toes, here we have 10 horns. We read in Revelations the 10 horns are meant to be 10 kings. We can see that again. You look down at chapter 7, verse 15, 24. Yep, 23. Thus he said, the 4th beast shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from the other kingdoms, shall devour the whole earth, trample it, break it into pieces. The 10 horns are 10 kings, who shall arise from this kingdom, etc., etc. So again, this idea of the 10 toes, the 10 horns are all about 10 kings. There's going to be 10 kingdoms. And so when back in Daniel chapter 2 again, so then in Daniel when he says that, in verse 44, right? In these days, these kings, he's talking about those 10 kings, right? That kingdom, that 4th beast, that 4th kingdom, that has 10 kings. The God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break into pieces and consume all of these kingdoms, and it shall last forever. So the first thing is, when this kingdom of God comes, it will destroy the 10 kingdoms that are in place at that time. Now, so I gotta pause again and gosh, it's 9:55. I gotta pause here and say one of the issues here is in the Old Testament they never saw the difference. They never saw the church age, right? They never saw the difference between the first coming of Christ and the second coming of Christ. And so when we talk about this Roman kingdom and with the 10 toes and this kingdom of Christ coming and crushing it, they never saw that there was some kind of break between the Roman kingdom and the coming of Christ. So there are many in the interpretation realm that I read who indicate that they believe that there's going to be a second Roman Empire, that the Roman Empire is going to be reborn at some point in time. It's going to have these 10 toes, these 10 kingdoms, and that is going to be the state in which Christ actually returns. Now, over the ages, it's been speculated that this has already happened, right? When Hitler came into power and was kind of taking over all of Europe, there were many people who believed this is it. This is the Roman Empire coming back to life. He is obviously the Antichrist, right? And that they could see that happening. Now, of course, that has gone through history. If you go, oh, oops, we were mistaken. You see people, actually, I was reading one commentary who said, well, right now, the European Union is the revival of the Roman Empire. And you know, that was a couple of years before we start seeing things like Brexit and people falling away from the European Union. But the point is, we don't know exactly what is going on with regard to the Roman Empire, whether it will be rebuilt or not. But there are many who believe it must be rebuilt in some sense before Christ comes again. So I just wanted to give you that. That's in the midst of this. Now the other thing is, this kingdom. The big thing in here is that the same God of heaven, back from verse 28, who said that he could reveal secrets, the same God of heaven who put Nebuchadnezzar in place. This is the same God of heaven who says there's going to be another kingdom and it's going to take over. It's going to crush everything that was before it. All of those things are going to take place. It's going to be a physical kingdom, not just a spiritual kingdom. It's going to be a kingdom on earth, physically on earth, that Jesus is going to rule in. There are some who believe that this is the church, right? That the church, when Christ came first to set it up, that is this new kingdom. The problem with that is that we really haven't crushed the Roman Empire, right? We really haven't crushed the world. God is not responsible for the world still. It's still under the control of the Gentiles. So, and I will also say that, as I mentioned before, as Jews read these verses, they absolutely understand that this kingdom in verse 44 is about when the Messiah comes back. They see that as a messianic verse. So we're talking here about this kingdom that gets set up. We're really talking about the second coming of Christ. Now, just trying to figure out what to do in 32 seconds. Now, I knew I was not going to finish. Actually, I have a gray bar on my paper saying we're probably going to only get to here. So this is where we got to. I just want to, so let me just pause and say I actually did not want to get into the next verse today when we talk about this stone, because there's a lot in there that I want to relate to you. So I wanted to give that ample time. So this is actually good to stop now. But I know we've gone through a lot of Medo-Persians and, you know, Alexander the Greats and all that stuff. Again, I just want to take you back to, this is a story about God is being in control, right? It's the God of heaven who revealed the secrets. It's the God of heaven who put Ned in place. It's the God of heaven who's actually bringing this second kingdom. All of these things are taking place because the God of heaven is in control. That's a piece I don't want you to miss. And that in the meantime, humans are trying to set up kingdoms. They're trying to set up, this is something really good. I'm in charge. I have all the power. I just want you to ponder as we kind of leave this. What kingdom are you supporting? What kingdom are you trying to bring to be? Are you supporting the kingdom of this world, whatever it is right now, right? Whatever this kingdom is that we're in the midst of right now, are you trying to support that kingdom, or are you trying to support the kingdom that God is bringing in? I think that's the message for us, right? Are you dependent upon this worldly kingdom, or are you dependent upon God's kingdom? Are you trying to build God's kingdom, or are you trying to build your own kingdom, the kingdom of this world, and your own prosperity and your own power and your own, how people see you, etc. So I think that's the message, because I think the point here is this little bitty stone comes in and crushes all of that and wipes it out at some point in time and builds this kingdom of God. We'll talk more about that as we look at next week. Okay? For those of you who hate history, sorry, this is the book of Daniel. Get used to it. We'll be talking more and more about it. I am trying to pull out what God's doing in the midst of it, but there's a lot of history that we have to go through. All right, y'all have a good day. Have a good prayer. Enjoy one another. Take care. Bye.
Bye.